In the summer of 1940, as German columns rolled triumphantly through Paris, few outside Britain understood the quiet scramble taking place in the corridors of MI6. One lesser-known fact is that even before France formally surrendered, British case officers were already drafting plans to rebuild the very intelligence networks they had lost. They knew that if Britain was to survive the looming invasion threat, they needed eyes and ears on the continent, agents capable of tracking every German battalion, every convoy, and every railway line commandeered by the Wehrmacht. What followed was one of the most complex and daring intelligence undertakings of the entire war. For MI6, rebuilding an intelligence presence in occupied France was not just a strategic challenge, it was a human one. Many pre-war contacts had disappeared, fled, or refused to cooperate under the new regime. Others were willing but terrified, knowing that the Geheime Feldpolizei and the Abwehr were tightening their grip. Surveillance intensified at train stations, telegraph offices, and ports. The Gestapo's reputation for swift, brutal reprisals spread rapidly. Any French citizen caught aiding a British agent risked execution or deportation to camps like Mauthausen. Yet, against this grim backdrop, MI6 case officers worked tirelessly from London, attempting to re-establish threads of trust with scattered allies in cities such as Lyon, Marseille, and Toulouse. Historical files reveal the immense tactical difficulties facing these early networks. Communications had collapsed. Couriers who once traveled openly now moved only under the cover of night. To reach Britain, messages were routed through painstaking chains. A coded note from Paris to Châteauroux, then to Limoges, then smuggled to the Pyrenees before crossing into neutral Spain. From there, it continued to Lisbon, where it was finally handed to a British diplomatic pouch bound for London. A single report could take weeks to arrive if it survived the journey at all. A diary entry from a French railway worker, later recovered in post-war archives, captures the atmosphere of fear. Every timetable change, every supply train, every convoy heading north, it all matters. But to speak is to risk everything. And yet silence feels like surrender. His words reflect the quiet courage of countless civilians who supplied the raw intelligence MI6 desperately needed. Their observations, scribbled on scraps of paper, hidden inside clothing seams, often revealed crucial details. Troop redeployments toward Normandy, new coastal fortifications along the Bay of Biscay, or the arrival of German engineering units in Brittany. During this period, MI6 began employing increasingly daring insertion methods. One such technique involved the Westland Lysander, a squat, unassuming aircraft modified for short-field landings. Pilots of No. 161 Squadron flew these missions under moonlit conditions, descending onto makeshift fields in rural France marked only by 3 handheld torches arranged in an L. Agents were dropped off with forged papers, miniature radios, cyanide capsules, and instructions to begin rebuilding Britain's shattered human intelligence architecture. Some flights succeeded brilliantly, others vanished into the night without a trace, leaving families in England with only a terse telegram, missing, presumed captured. Submarine insertions added another layer of complexity. British S-class submarines surfaced under darkness near rocky inlets along the French Atlantic coast. Agents stepped into rubber dinghies, rowing silently toward shore while German searchlights swept the waves. These missions were considered so risky that success rates were rarely discussed in official memos. Yet they continued, for the need was too great to stop. A recently declassified MI6 memo from late 1940 highlights the urgency. German organizations seek to reorganize France into an operational platform for attacks on Britain. Immediate and reliable intelligence is no less than a national necessity. This wasn't hyperbole. Britain's survival depended partly on understanding how the Germans were preparing the French coastline, how they were fortifying ports like Brest, Lorient, and Saint-Nazaire, and how they were using French rail networks to consolidate power. By the end of 1940, MI6's efforts began to take shape. Networks such as Etoile, J-Damicol, and others in embryonic form started generating valuable reporting. Their members included teachers, postal workers, shopkeepers, former soldiers, and even monks. Many had no prior experience in clandestine work, yet their contributions became the backbone of Britain's early intelligence picture of occupied France. Their work revealed the construction of new radar sites, the rotation of panzer regiments, and the location of Luftwaffe fuel depots, information London used to plan early RAF reconnaissance flights and sabotage initiatives. Still, the constant threat of betrayal loomed. Some agents disappeared quietly. Others were discovered through chance encounters, mistaken identities, or simple fatigue. Each missing operative added another layer of mystery, another gap in the intelligence chain, Another question that London would not be able to answer until after the war, if ever. As the first winter of occupation descended over France, MI6 faced a difficult truth. The networks had been rebuilt, but the shadow war had only just begun. Every message smuggled across borders, every coded transmission, every nighttime landing brought new possibilities and new dangers. The stage was set for operations far more ambitious, more daring, and in some cases, more tragic than anything attempted before. And as 1941 approached, the Germans were no longer merely consolidating their hold, they were hunting. The next phase of MI6's covert war in France would push both sides deeper into darkness. By early 1941, MI6's clandestine footprint inside occupied France had grown beyond what even London had predicted. One little-known fact from this period is that the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service, considered France the most active British intelligence battleground on the continent, surpassing even the Low Countries. And they were right. MI6 networks like Etoile and Jadamikal were gathering streams of information so precise that British analysts could sometimes identify the departure time of a single German supply train heading toward the Atlantic Wall. But with rising success came escalating danger, as German counterintelligence sharpened its focus on dismantling these fragile webs of resistance. Life for British-backed agents was a daily struggle against both the occupiers and their own mounting paranoia. Resistance members had to memorize new routes across Paris every week to avoid creating patterns that German surveillance units could detect. Safe houses shifted constantly, moving from crowded tenement apartments in Montmartre to rural barns on the outskirts of Orleans. Couriers traveled with forged identity papers, their pockets lined with cigarette cards that contained hidden microdots, tiny photographs carrying entire intelligence reports. Every train ride was a test. German police boarded randomly, demanding documents with a cold precision that made even the innocent tremble. For agents, one misplaced consonant in a forged surname could mean immediate arrest. A key component of MI6's mid-war intelligence boom was the railway network. France's vast and efficient rail system had become the logistical artery of the German occupation. MI6 instructed its contacts, railway workers, station clerks, ticket agents, to record train movements discreetly. They counted flatbed cars, marked unusual cargoes, noted troop insignia, and memorized departure times. These seemingly small details were invaluable. They revealed not only the flow of German troops but also resource shortages, operational priorities, and clues about future offensives. Yet this work came with a heavy emotional cost. A diary entry from a young courier named Lucien, preserved in post-war French archives, reads, "On the line between Tours and Vierzon, I passed 3 German officers. One looked at me too long. My hands sweated onto the coded note in my glove. I wondered if my heartbeat was loud enough for them to hear." Her words capture the strained nerves that fueled every mission. Even the simplest task, dropping a message into a hollowed tree stump or exchanging a prearranged phrase at a cafe, could spiral into deadly consequences. The historical context deepens the sense of peril. By mid-1941, German units in France were no longer celebrating conquest. They were consolidating control. The Gestapo increased its presence at postal centers, intercepting letters, opening packages, and monitoring telegraph rooms. Abwehr officers from Section 3F, specialized in counter-sabotage, began mapping suspected British intelligence networks. They posed as black market traders, railway officials, even sympathetic clergy. These operatives blended into French society so effectively that some MI6 agents would later admit they felt hunted by shadows wearing friendly faces. Amid this tightening noose, MI6 introduced more sophisticated methods to preserve operational security. Agents received new cipher pads using one-time encryption techniques far more secure than earlier systems. Radio operators switched frequencies more often, limiting transmissions to mere seconds to evade German direction-finding vans that prowled the streets of Paris, Amiens, and Bordeaux. Even MI6's messages to its own agents became more cryptic. Instead of simple task orders, they contained riddles or literary references only the intended recipient could interpret. One such message, sent to an Etoile operative in Lyon, read, "The shepherd watches the northern hill." The operative understood it meant increased surveillance of troop trains heading toward Dijon. Still, networks remained vulnerable. The Germans were patient, meticulous hunters. They mapped courier routes, identified patterns in radio transmissions, and waited for moments when agents became too bold or fatigued. Arrests increased. Some captured operatives broke under torture. Others held firm. A handful vanished without any record, MI6 would later debate whether these individuals were killed, recruited by the Germans, or simply lost in the fog of war. One chilling incident occurred at the Gare du Nord in Paris. A courier carrying details about German panzer movements toward Calais was stopped for a routine document check. His forged identity card passed inspection, but an aware officer noticed the courier's boots, too new, too clean, not consistent with a supposed factory worker. The courier escaped only because a sudden air raid siren caused a momentary distraction. His report reached London 2 weeks later, influencing RAF reconnaissance flights over northern France. But his brush with exposure underscored a brutal truth. Survival often hinged on the smallest, most unpredictable variables. As MI6's intelligence pipeline grew stronger, the mystery surrounding missing agents also deepened. Some networks reported couriers who simply never arrived. Safe houses found abandoned. Radios left warm, recently used, with no operator in sight. These disappearances were rarely explained. In later declassified files, MI6 analysts described them as voids in the record, moments where the human intelligence chain simply dissolved under pressure, leaving no trace. By the end of 1941, the situation in occupied France had transformed again. MI6 had achieved its goal of building robust intelligence networks, but the Germans were now mounting a coordinated counteroffensive. Every successful report carried the silent question: how long could these networks survive? And more importantly, what price would be paid to keep them alive? The answer would come in 1942, as MI6 prepared one of its most daring operations yet, one that required landing agents under the very noses of German coastal defenses. By mid-1942, MI6 embarked on one of its most daring covert undertakings in occupied France, an operation that remains surprisingly little known, even among students of intelligence history. Few realize that during this period, British submarines were quietly surfacing along France's rugged Atlantic coastline, not to attack German ships, but to deliver and extract spies. These missions were so dangerous that Admiral Max Horton, commander of Britain's western approaches, once described them in a classified memo as operations balanced on a knife edge between brilliance and disaster. It was in this treacherous environment that MI6 planned an audacious infiltration designed to uncover the Reich's U-boat activities in Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, two ports that served as the beating heart of the German Atlantic submarine war. For the agents assigned to this mission, the struggle began long before they stepped onto French soil. The most critical task fell to specially trained radio operators, men often dismissed as mere technicians but whose work carried staggering risk. These operators would be the lifeline between the French coast and London, sending updates on German U-boat refits, repair cycles, and departure schedules. To the casual observer, these details seemed mundane. But to British naval strategists, they were invaluable. Knowing when a U-boat left harbor could mean the difference between a successful convoy crossing and a catastrophic Wolfpack attack in the mid-Atlantic. The mission began one moonless night in June 1942. The British S-class submarine HMS Seraph surfaced off the coast of Brittany, mere kilometers from German searchlights positioned along the shoreline. Hidden underneath a shroud of sea mist, the submarine released two collapsible dinghies. Inside sat 3 MI6 agents, a wireless operator known by the codename Ravel, a maritime observer named Etienne Marquand, and a courier using the alias Clement. Their orders were precise: establish safe houses, deploy a hidden radio set, observe U-boat traffic, and report on any new construction at the massive Karaman submarine base in Lorient. Historical context gives weight to the danger they faced. Lorient had become one of Germany's most fortified naval hubs. Its massive concrete pens, later known as K1, K2, and K3, were considered virtually indestructible. Allied bombers repeatedly struck the area, but the thick reinforced structures shrugged off the hits. The base bustled with engineers, mechanics, naval officers, and Gestapo patrols. Even approaching the perimeter required meticulous planning. After landing, the agents made their way inland, slipping past patrols and well-camouflaged machine gun nests. Their first safe house was a stone farmhouse owned by a retired fisherman sympathetic to the resistance. Ravel set up his radio in a cramped attic space with a makeshift antenna threaded through cracks in the wooden walls. His transmissions were quick bursts, never more than 20 seconds, sent during German shift changes when patrol routines were momentarily disrupted. Yet even with these precautions, the mission faced constant threats. German direction-finding vans, known colloquially as Black Marias, prowled the roads from Lorient to Vannes, scanning for rogue signals. Ravel often cut transmissions early, convinced he heard the distant hum of engines closing in. On July 12, one such van stopped just 2 kilometers from the safe house, prompting the team to scatter into the night. They returned the next morning to find tire tracks circling the property, marks left deliberately to intimidate. A primary challenge of the operation was the sheer scale of German activity. Marquand, observing from coastal bluffs and abandoned quarries, documented nearly continuous U-boat traffic. His notes, preserved in MI6's declassified archives, reveal pages of sketches, hull numbers, turret modifications, new camouflage patterns. He also reported an increase in anti-aircraft positions around the Karaman base, suggesting the Germans anticipated heavier Allied bombing. One entry stands out: unusual armored plating observed on new Type 7 submarines, possibly reinforcement against depth charges. Whether this was a misidentification or an early insight into improved U-boat construction remains an open question. But the operation soon entered darker territory. Beginning in late July, several MI6 contacts in Brittany went silent. One courier, scheduled to meet Revel near a cemetery north of WWII, simply never arrived. Another safe house, a modest farmhouse near Plouay, was found abandoned with meals still on the table. Reports from local resistance members suggested that German patrols had increased arrests in the region. Yet, curiously, no records of such arrests appeared in captured German documents after the war. The vanishings triggered deep concern in London. A fragment from an SIS secret intelligence service memo noted, "Unaccounted disruptions in agent chain cause undetermined. Possibility of unregistered enemy action cannot be dismissed." Analysts debated whether the agents had been captured or forced to scatter. But one possibility continued to trouble them: infiltration. If a French collaborator had compromised the network, the Germans could have been dismantling it quietly, leaving no trace behind. Despite these ominous signs, intelligence from the Brittany cell reached Britain steadily through August. The Ultra program confirmed several details transmitted by Revel, demonstrating the accuracy of MI6's field observations. Coastal Command used this information to time reconnaissance flights and, in at least 2 cases, to redirect anti-submarine aircraft toward known departure windows for U-boat patrols. These operations contributed to the sinking of several submarines during the critical summer months. Yet the success came at a cost. On August 29, Revel transmitted his final message, a brief update on troop reinforcements at the WWII defenses. The signal was clean, clear, and unusually steady. It was also the last anyone ever heard from him. When a retrieval team attempted to locate the safe house weeks later, they found no trace of the radio equipment, no sign of struggle, and no explanation. The void left by Ravel's disappearance remains one of the great unanswered questions of MI6's wartime operations in France. What happened to him? Was he captured? Killed? Or did he flee deeper into the countryside, trying to escape a tightening German noose? As autumn 1942 approached, MI6 prepared an almost unimaginable follow-up effort to rescue compromised agents, an operation that would push the limits of stealth aviation and change the fate of several key operatives in France. In 1943, MI6 prepared an operation so daring that even among the archives of clandestine aviation, it stands out as one of the most extraordinary episodes of the war. Few people realize that Britain's secret air missions into France relied on a single squadron, number 161, Special Duties Squadron, flying Lysander aircraft that were never meant for deep penetration flights into enemy territory. The Lysander was slow, could barely defend itself, and carried only a single passenger. Yet it had one unmatched talent: it could land and take off from fields no larger than a farm paddock. This made it the aircraft of choice for one of MI6's boldest rescue attempts, a nighttime extraction near Tours that would test the limits of courage, precision, and luck. The struggle leading up to the operation centered on a critical problem. MI6 had confirmed that a cluster of agents in central France had been exposed. Intercepted messages indicated that German counterintelligence was moving swiftly, conducting raids on safe houses from Orleans to Angers. MI6 believed that 3 high-value operatives, codenamed Basil, Orion, and Merit, were now in imminent danger. Basil carried intelligence on German armor reinforcements in western France, Orion maintained courier chains for resistance networks, and Merit, the most enigmatic, held a dispatch case filled with reconnaissance sketches showing German movements toward the Channel coast. Losing any one of them would damage the intelligence web MI6 had painstakingly built. Losing all 3 would be catastrophic. The chosen extraction site was a clandestine field north of Tours, selected for its flat terrain and the presence of tree lines that could conceal torchbearers guiding the aircraft. But there was a complication. German patrols had recently tightened their sweeps across the Loire region. WWII officers, posing as farm laborers and postal workers, had been spotted along local roads. Even the landscape fought against MI6's plans. Spring rains turned the fields into soft, uneven ground that risked trapping the Lysander's wheels during landing. Operational notes preserved in the National Archives offer an insider's perspective. In one briefing, Flight Lieutenant Peter von Fowler, one of the most experienced Lysander pilots, described the mission as a calculated gamble with every variable in the enemy's favor. Yet he volunteered without hesitation. Over the course of the war, von Fowler would complete more secret flights than any other pilot, but the tension surrounding the Tours operation was palpable, even for him. On the night of May 18, 1943, the Lysander took off from RAF Tempsford, its belly packed with fuel tanks and forged French identity documents. The aircraft skimmed across the channel at low altitude, using both darkness and terrain masking to evade German radar. Once over France, von Fowler flew by dead reckoning, navigation based not on landmarks but on time, speed, and direction. Any mistake could send him drifting off course and into German searchlights. On the ground, the three MI6 agents made their way to the field separately. Basil arrived first, slipping past a checkpoint near Château after producing papers that identified him as a traveling machinist. Orion came next, disguised as a wine merchant. But Merritt, the courier carrying the critical reconnaissance sketches, never appeared. An hour passed, then two. Civilians loyal to the resistance whispered of increased German patrols on the northern roads. One farmer reported seeing a black Maria van earlier that day, a sinister sign that direction-finding teams might be in the area. Shortly after midnight, the distant hum of the Lysander's engine broke the silence. Three French torchbearers moved into position, holding their lights low to avoid detection. Von Fowler swooped down, planting the aircraft on the wet grass with a controlled bounce. Basil and Orion sprinted toward the plane and climbed into the cramped rear cockpit. The pilot waited the allotted extra minute for Merritt, a minute that felt like an hour, then faced the terrible reality: the third agent had not made it. And so the operation shifted from rescue to survival. Just as von Fowler prepared for takeoff, headlights appeared on a distant road. The Germans were moving closer. The torchbearers extinguished their lights, plunging the field into darkness. With no guides, the Lysander made its takeoff run blind, engines straining against the muddy ground. For a moment, the wheels sank, threatening disaster, but then the aircraft lurched free, lifting just above the trees as tracer fire arced into the sky. The Lysander disappeared into the night, carrying two agents to safety while leaving one behind. What happened to Merritt remains one of MI6's wartime mysteries. His dispatch case, containing sketches of German armor redeployments, was never recovered. No German arrest records mention him. No resistance reports confirm his fate. It is as if he simply walked off the map. The successful extraction of Basil and Orion reinforced MI6's belief that air insertions and extractions could be a decisive tool. Yet the haunting absence of Merritt weighed heavily. Intelligence officers worried that his materials, if captured, could compromise operations across northern France. That concern set the stage for what MI6 planned next: a drive toward full-scale intelligence coordination ahead of the Allied invasion, where every report, every sketch, and every courier might determine the fate of D-Day itself. By early 1944, the intelligence war in France had entered its most critical phase. Yet one astonishing truth remains largely unknown. Some of the most influential pre-D-Day intelligence did not come from Allied reconnaissance aircraft or high-level code-breaking, but from MI6-trained operatives embedded so deeply inside occupied France that their reports often reached London within 48 hours. These agents, teachers, railway clerks, mechanics, former soldiers, and resistance couriers formed the backbone of an intelligence surge that helped shape Operation Overlord. But their work did not unfold in triumph or clarity. Instead, it played out in dimly lit barns, crowded cafes, abandoned farmhouses, and hidden forests, each carrying the scent of fear, secrecy, and the constant threat of German reprisals. The struggle of early 1944 centered around one reality: the Germans were redeploying forces in anticipation of an Allied landing, but they did not know where it would strike. Neither, fully, did the Allies. What they needed most was on-the-ground confirmation: reports of panzer divisions moving at night, fuel depots being repositioned, Luftwaffe units shifting locations, and German engineers reinforcing particular sectors of the Atlantic Wall. MI6 networks were uniquely placed to observe this. Many of their operatives lived and worked near key transport hubs in Caen, Rouen, Brest, and the Loire Valley. Their reports, smuggled through courier lines stretching from Normandy to the Pyrenees, captured the pulse of a continent bracing for invasion. One particularly critical insight emerged from railway workers assigned to the Paris-Cherbourg and Paris-Calais lines. They began documenting irregular troop convoys, trains loaded with armored half-tracks, artillery pieces, and panzer grenadier units moving northward from the Loire region. Their notes, scribbled on scraps of paper and concealed in hollowed-out bolts or matchboxes, revealed something London urgently needed to know, that German high command appeared to believe the main landing would occur near the Pas-de-Calais. This aligned perfectly with the Allied deception plan, Operation Fortitude, but confirmation was essential before the plan could be fully trusted. A revealing entry from an MI6 field report dated February 1944 reads, "Increased rail traffic toward Calais sector suggests expectation of assault from Dover direction. Artillery transfers observed near Boulogne. Morale uncertain among troops, shortages of fuel reported." The mention of fuel was especially important. Allied strategists understood that without sufficient fuel reserves, German armored divisions could not effectively counterattack during the first hours of a landing. Reports like these helped planners assess the mobility of panzer units in real time. Still, every new piece of intelligence carried an enormous burden. German patrols intensified, particularly after several radio detection events in Brittany and Normandy. Abwehr agents, disguised as French civilians, began infiltrating taverns, farms, and railway stations in search of suspicious conversations or coded notes. MI6's radio operators, still using compact suitcase radios, sometimes broadcast from beneath floorboards, behind false walls, or inside hay carts covered with canvas. They changed positions constantly, knowing that a single long transmission could bring German direction-finding teams crashing through the door within minutes. Against this backdrop, the human cost became increasingly evident. One courier group operating between Le Mans and Caen lost 2 members within a single week. Their arrests were never officially documented. They simply vanished. Another network in northern Brittany discovered that a safe house had been compromised when they returned to find a table set for dinner, chairs overturned, and a half-written radio cipher pad left open, an eerie sign of a hurried escape or a sudden raid. MI6's London headquarters marked these events with a chilling phrase repeatedly found in declassified files: "Status of agents unknown." Yet the mission pressed on. The intelligence they collected was too vital to abandon. In March 1944, MI6 operatives provided a detailed report describing the strengthening of German defenses around Caen, including the construction of new anti-tank ditches and fortified machine gun nests. Around the same time, an MI6-affiliated group near Bayeux identified the arrival of the 352nd Infantry Division, information that later proved critical when Allied planners selected assault points for the Normandy beaches. Meanwhile, resistance-linked reporters along the Loire River noted heavy convoys transporting concrete, steel beams, and engineers, supplies used for coastal gun emplacements and radar installations. The insights were profound, but one discovery caused particular alarm. In late April, MI6 received sketches, likely drawn by an agent trained in reconnaissance, revealing a significant troop reshuffle involving the 21st Panzer Division. At first, London analysts couldn't agree whether this indicated a plan to reinforce Normandy or simply rotational movement. The uncertainty compelled MI6 to intensify observation in the region, though this led to several close calls, including the near capture of a radio operator near Falaise. As tension across France reached its breaking point, one final thread of mystery emerged. A small courier group transporting updated intelligence on Normandy fortifications left a safe house near Lisieux on May 22. They were scheduled to pass the information to a resistance contact who would transmit it to London. The group never arrived. Several days later, local farmers reported seeing German trucks near the route, but no arrests were recorded. The disappearance remains unresolved, yet the information they carried somehow reached British hands, transmitted anonymously through an MI6 drop point in Rennes. Whether this came from a surviving courier or another unknown agent has been debated by historians ever since. As June approached, MI6 had accomplished the impossible. Despite increased German pressure, compromised networks, and unexplained vanishings, they delivered enough intelligence to help refine the Allied invasion plan. Their reports shaped bombing targets, influenced paratrooper landing zones, and confirmed German tactical assumptions. They became the hidden foundation on which Operation Overlord stood. But the Shadow War was not over. In the days after D-Day, France erupted into resistance uprisings, and MI6 operatives would need to navigate a landscape where chaos, reprisals, and fierce German counterattacks threatened every step they took. And in this whirlwind, some agents would achieve their greatest successes, while others would simply disappear. In the weeks following D-Day, a little-known reality defined the intelligence war in France. MI6 operatives who had spent years working quietly in the shadows suddenly found themselves on a battlefield transformed overnight. The careful, clandestine networks they had built under the noses of the Germans were thrust into the chaos of an open uprising. Communications lines, once maintained through secret radios and coded courier routes, now intersected with rapidly advancing Allied units, retreating German formations, and local resistance groups rising in a wave of sabotage and rebellion. And amid this turmoil, MI6 agents were tasked with one final mission: guide the Allied advance using intelligence gathered before and after the landings, even as the landscape around them collapsed into unpredictability. The primary struggle of this period came from one undeniable truth: the German retreat was not a rout but a series of controlled, violent withdrawals. Wehrmacht and SS units struck back fiercely at suspected resistance supporters, while panzer divisions executed fighting retreats across the Loire, the Seine, and the plains of Normandy. For MI6 agents embedded within these regions, danger multiplied. Their networks were strained, not only by German reprisals but by the sudden movement of front lines. Safe houses that had survived the occupation unexpectedly lay directly within German fallback corridors. Radio operators who had taken years to perfect their concealment now found themselves broadcasting in environments where firefights erupted without warning. At the same time, the value of MI6 intelligence surged. Allied divisions pushing inland from the beaches relied heavily on updated knowledge of German strongpoints, artillery positions, and retreat routes. One remarkable example involved an MI6 linked observer near St. Lo. Using a small telescope hidden inside a church belfry, he noted the precise location of an 88mm gun battery that had resisted multiple Allied attempts to silence it. His report, smuggled to a British forward intelligence post via a teenage courier, enabled artillery units to neutralize the battery hours later. Similar success came from an MI6 radio operator outside Cannes, who identified a concealed fuel depot whose destruction impeded a German counterattack by the 21st Panzer Division. Yet not all actions were triumphant. A newly declassified field note from an MI6 liaison officer reveals a chilling moment near Falaise: radio operator missing. Last transmission interrupted mid-sentence. Possible enemy raid or shell burst. Hours later, the location was overrun by both German and Allied forces in the swirling battle for the Falaise pocket. No trace of the operator or his equipment was ever recovered. Incidents like this were common. The chaos of mobile warfare swallowed agents whole, leaving MI6 to piece together their fates in the months and years that followed. Historical context underscores the intensity of the period. After D-Day, the Gestapo and the Sicherheitsdienst (SD) initiated a series of brutal countermeasures. They executed suspected resistance members, searched entire villages, and increased patrol frequency. Any trace of British involvement was treated as evidence of espionage. Even as German authority crumbled, their reprisals became more erratic and violent. MI6 files reference at least 4 cases in which captured agents were transferred deeper into Germany. In some instances, the paperwork ends abruptly, suggesting that records were destroyed, lost in the chaos, or never created in the first place. For families back in Britain, the silence became a torment that lingered for decades. Still, MI6's continuing operations played a decisive role in supporting advancing Allied troops. One team near Chartres intercepted German radio chatter revealing a hasty repositioning of artillery meant to slow the U.S. 5th Armored Division. Their warning allowed American patrols to adjust their route, preventing an ambush. Another cell in the Loire region coordinated with local resistance fighters to sabotage bridges, forcing German units into predictable choke points. These actions helped shape the operational environment as Allied forces pushed toward Paris and beyond. Yet even as MI6 contributed to liberation efforts, new mysteries emerged. One of the most confounding involved a 3-person courier group operating near the forest of Rambouillet. They had been tasked with delivering updated sketches of German fallback positions toward the Seine. The group set out on bicycles, standard procedure to blend in with civilian traffic, but failed to reach their handoff point. Weeks after the liberation of Paris, their bicycles were found hidden in underbrush, but no remains, documents, or captured files surfaced. Their final report, however, somehow reached London, delivered anonymously through an MI6 drop point with no indication of who carried it. The question of whether one of the couriers survived, or whether another unknown agent stepped in, remains unresolved. As autumn 1944 unfolded, the tide of liberation swept across France. MI6 teams, once scattered and alone, began linking up with Allied units. Many agents finally revealed their codenames, safe houses, and hidden caches to advancing commanders. Others emerged from months of concealment wearing the same worn clothing and carrying radio sets patched together with wire and tape. And yet, beneath the relief of liberation, a somber truth lingered. Dozens of MI6 operatives had vanished between D-Day and the breakout from Normandy. Some were known to have been executed. Others disappeared during firefights, evacuations, or last-minute escapes. But many simply vanished into the fog of war, leaving behind empty safe houses, unfinished cipher pads, and questions that no historian has yet been able to fully answer. As the guns fell silent in France, MI6's wartime story did not end, it transformed. The success of their intelligence had helped shape the liberation of Western Europe. Their sacrifices remained hidden in classified files for decades. And the lingering mysteries, the vanished couriers, the missing radio operators, the unreturned agents, continue to fuel investigations even in modern archival research. The narrative of MI6 in occupied France is one of courage, precision, sacrifice, and unanswered questions. And though the war moved on to new fronts, the shadows they left behind remain part of the enduring enigma of World War II intelligence operations.